In analyzing the thematic resonance and cinematic texture of Rust Valley Restorers in the episode titled A Little Help from My Friends, it becomes clear that the show's surface identity as a reality series about restoring old cars is merely the chassis for a deeper narrative machine that explores loyalty, aging, identity, and the complicated emotional fuel that powers friendships over many decades. When I watch this episode again with a more critical lens, I realize that its real power lies not in the gleam of polished chrome or the roar of rejuvenated engines, but in the friction that builds between people when passion collides with pressure. The episode constructs a rhythm that moves between personal vulnerability and automotive craftsmanship, and this dynamic encourages viewers to look beyond the rust piles and heavy tools to see the emotional architecture holding the characters together. What makes A Little Help from My Friends particularly intriguing is that it examines the way people rely on each other not only to finish projects, but also to maintain their own sense of purpose in a world changing faster than they can adapt to. Mike Hall, the eccentric heart of Rust Valley, becomes the anchor around which the episode revolves, not simply because he leads the restoration projects, but because he struggles with the weight of decades spent amassing forgotten vehicles and funneling his life's energy into pieces of steel that seem to reflect his internal world more accurately than any conversation could. The episode begins with a dilemma that is deceptively simple. Mike wants to push through yet another ambitious restoration despite shrinking finances and escalating physical strain. The crew humors him at first, offering friendly jabs as they assess the new project's feasibility, but the scene reveals nuances beneath the humor. The camera lingers on Mike's contemplative glances at his yard full of cars, almost as though he is silently defending the choices that built his unconventional life. As the others rotate around him like planets in a chaotic orbit, we see the subtle ways friendship manifests through patience, sarcasm, and an unspoken vow not to let him collapse under the pressure of his own dreams. One of the scenes that stands out most is the debate over whether to devote their increasingly limited time and budget to a car that, on the surface, appears beyond saving. This moment is framed in a way that positions the car as both a literal challenge and a metaphorical one. Everyone pushes back, arguing with varying levels of frustration, pointing out the number of unfinished jobs and the emotional cost of pushing too hard. The tension thickens, and while the argument is framed around a single vehicle, its emotional center is distinctly human. Mike's reluctance to let go of any project reflects a deeper fear of letting go of parts of himself, and the crew's exasperation is tinted with worry that he's pushing too far. I find the scene particularly compelling because it balances authenticity with narrative tension. We have all seen friends who cling to responsibilities or hobbies because they fear that slowing down might mean losing relevance or identity. The crew steps into the role of guardians, not controlling Mike's choices, but cushioning his impact with reality. Their insistence that they need a more stable plan is not mutiny, but an intervention shaped by care. Another interesting moment arrives when the team splits into smaller units to tackle different aspects of the restoration. This structural choice in the episode gives viewers a closer look at individual personalities and working rhythms. Avery's explosive but sincere energy remains a counterweight to Mike's stubborn introspection, while Connor acts as an emotional translator between generations, softening the edges of conflict with his calm presence. Watching these dynamics unfold reminds me of my own experiences collaborating on challenging projects with close friends. There's an unspoken rhythm in long-term relationships that allows people to argue intensely one moment and resume their bond the next without missing a beat. A Little Help from My Friends captures that rhythm beautifully, especially in the sequences where the crew shares personal anecdotes while working on engine components or modifying bodywork. These scenes highlight one of the show's greatest strengths. It recognizes that the reconstruction of an old car mirrors the reconstruction of a person's memories and identity. Every dent, rust patch, and missing piece represents a moment in time worth revisiting. Mike often treats vehicles like time capsules, and in this episode, That symbolism becomes even more explicit as he debates why letting a particular car go feels too much like disconnecting from the past. The emotional core of the episode peaks in a scene where Mike momentarily steps away from the workshop, overwhelmed not by exhaustion, but by the emotional confrontation of his own limitations. The camera does not sensationalize this moment. Instead, it lingers on the stillness around him, framing the environment as both a sanctuary and a burden. The rows of rusting vehicles become a reflection of the years he has poured into preserving stories that may only matter to him. This introspective scene adds immense depth to the episode's theme. Aging is not simply a matter of growing older. It is about reconciling who you were with who you are becoming. The crew's insistence on helping him is less about completing the car and more about helping him face those emotional truths without surrendering to them. One of my favorite aspects of this episode is how humor is woven into moments of tension. Heavy arguments give way to lighthearted teasing, and even during the hardest conversations, there is a spark of absurdity that reminds viewers that relationships built over decades can survive stress because they are strengthened by shared history. The playful banter between Avery and Mike during a welding session offers a brief but much-needed release valve, showing that conflict and affection can coexist without undermining the emotional stakes. As the restoration progresses, the episode builds toward a moment of communal triumph that feels earned rather than manufactured. When the car finally comes to life, sputtering before roaring into a steady rhythm, the crew's celebration is not simply about completing a project. It symbolizes their collective resilience. They overcame not only the physical obstacles of the restoration, but also the emotional turbulence that threatened to splinter their unity. The sound of the revived engine becomes a declaration of their enduring loyalty. What I find particularly fascinating is how the episode uses this victory not as a conclusion, but as a transition into a slower, more reflective moment. After the celebration, Mike quietly expresses gratitude for the team's support, though in his own gruff, indirect manner. He does not articulate grand emotional speeches, but the subtle shift in his demeanor is enough to convey the depth of his appreciation. The episode's final scenes demonstrate the delicate balance of camaraderie and independence that defines long-term friendships. In analyzing the artistic choices within this episode, it is worth considering the broader cultural appeal of Rust Valley Restorers. The show stands at the intersection of nostalgia and craftsmanship, offering viewers a window into a world that celebrates both tradition and innovation. A Little Help from My Friends amplifies these themes by foregrounding the emotional labor behind physical labor. The star of the episode is not the car, but the relationships that make its restoration meaningful. Many viewers, myself included, are drawn to this blend of authenticity and emotional sincerity because it reminds us of our own connections, whether with friends who helped us through difficult times or with personal projects that serve as lifelines when words failed. The episode challenges us to reconsider how we define strength. It is not the ability to carry burdens alone, but the courage to let others step in when the load becomes too heavy. Looking back on all the scenes, I find that the episode excels in demonstrating how support systems are built not through grand gestures, but through the small, consistent acts of people who refuse to let each other fall apart. The title, A Little Help from My Friends, feels less like a catchy phrase and more like a thesis statement for the entire emotional journey. When the credits roll, viewers are left with the distinct impression that the restoration was simply a narrative tool, a means of exploring themes far more universal than engine rebuilding. The episode invites us to reflect on our own relationships, our own fears of aging, our own battles between ambition and reality. It pushes us to recognize that progress, whether mechanical or personal, is rarely possible in isolation. Ultimately, A Little Help from My Friends stands out as one of the most resonant pieces of Rust Valley storytelling because it captures the essence of human connection through the lens of restoration. It reminds us that behind every finished project is a network of people, each contributing not just skills but emotional investment. It invites us to appreciate the invisible threads that hold friendships together and to acknowledge the quiet heroism in asking for help.